Welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I am your host, Joy Votrobek, and back with me is our senior analyst, Laurence Sanford.
Glad to be here, Joy.
Thank you, Larry. And today we are going to discuss Larry's article titled Iran and Proxies. There's a lot going on in the Middle East, so we have a lot to discuss.
Yes.
And you can find all of Larry's articles at our website at www.ascf.us. Please consider becoming a member of the ASCF for $100 a year. That's just a little less than $10 a month, and it also includes a paid Substack subscription, which Larry writes on as well, and our bi-weekly newsletter. So Larry, we know, well, we've seen a lot going on. We know Iran's proxies from your paper. We've got Hezbollah in the north. We've got Hamas is obviously a big part of the contention. The Houthis down in Yemen.
Iran has what is called a ring of fire around Israel because, as you know, the theme of Iran is death to America and death to Israel. And Israel's the little devil or Satan, and America is the great Satan. And they're an Islamic theocracy whose goal is world domination of Islam. And the biggest problem to their world domination is the United States and Western civilization. So anything they can do to hurt it or bring it down or harm it, that's in their game plan. And Israel represents Western civilization in the Middle East. And it used to be all part of the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and therefore was under Muslim control. Israel started to repopulate the area back in the late 1800s with the Zionism. And they have their own little territory. And Israel, on many occasions, has offered land for peace. And every time they offer land for peace, it comes back to bite them. And Gaza, for example, had Jewish settlers 30 years ago. And in part of the deal of land for peace, Israel seized and threw out, forcefully evacuated all Israelis from Gaza. So it was then controlled by the Palestinians living in Gaza. And they voted for Hamas, and there hasn't been a free election in the last 20 years. But all polls indicate the Gazans are very happy with Hamas, and they teach in schools, they teach in the culture, they teach everywhere to hate Israel, to hate Jews, to hate a Western civilization. Yet the United States continues to send billions of dollars in aid. I can't explain why.
And we talked in a prior podcast about the Gazans not being innocent civilians, as Hamas would like to suggest. Yeah. But to your point, what you just said is that it seems like they are being very much indoctrinated by Hamas, and all the children are taught what they want them to hear, especially about Israel.
Well, again, the school children, a lot of them are being taught through the United Nations relief organizations. So the United States sends billions of dollars to the UN to help these so-called...
Which we now know harbors terrorists.
who have textbooks that say hate America and hate Western civilization, and it's U.S. tax dollars. And I just don't understand our position. We just spent $300 million to build a pier.
Yeah, I was just going to talk to that. Go ahead, because what do you think's going on with that pier?
It floated out to sea, so they had to retrieve it back. So we spent $300 million for a pier to bring aid to the Palestinians in Gaza. Is that going to buy us any friendship or peace and security? I think not. No.
Probably not.
No. So.
And speaking of friendship and security, so now getting back to Iran and its proxies, Israel was in some talks with Saudi Arabia prior to this whole Hamas attack. But even if they went back to these talks and it was successful, do you think in a scenario that Saudi Arabia would have come to the aid of Israel over Iran?
No.
I don't either.
No. I think the thing to remember, there's a couple of policies, general philosophies of action I think we should always remember is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so Saudi is kissing up to Israel because it can help them economically and be a counterbalance to Iran. Both are Muslims. countries. But Iran is Shia and Saudis are Sunnis, and they have this hatred for one another on a religious viewpoint that goes back 1,000 years. But they both do not like the West. And Iran is blatant about it. Saudi has established all these organizations in mosques all over the world that preach the Islamic doctrine of world domination and hatred of Western civilization. So they're both out to get us one way or the other, just a different way to get us.
And as we mentioned previously, both are sending numerous amounts of money to our American universities.
Yeah. So Israel is trying to make deals with fellow Middle Eastern countries, but always in the back of their mind, they have to know that Islam is really not their friend. So
I mean, economically, it probably can be to their advantage, but on a belief system, no.
No.
And as far as their security, no.
No.
Which brings up another issue, and I think a lot of our listeners' minds probably, does Iran have the capability, have nuclear capability already, which we've been discussing. We think that is true.
We think they have it, yeah.
And if so, would they use it on Israel?
Depends. That sounds like a lawyer answer, but it depends. It depends on the circumstances. I'd say right now is probably not a good time. But I mean, you know, a good example to look at is Pakistan and India. They hate each other. They both have nuclear weapons, but both of them decided maybe not the right time. So timing's everything. And of course, if Iran attacks Israel with nuclear weapons, Israel has nuclear weapons, and they'd wipe out Iran. So is it worth the price? I've never thought that nuclear weapons were the end all of weapons. To me, the most dangerous weapons of all are biological, and that's much harder to control, and it leaves your cities intact. It just means you don't have people. So in a way, that's the way to go. If you want to take out a country, do it biologically.
Now, there has been some talk about Israel using white phosphorus, I heard, in northern Israel, southern Lebanon area.
Oh, yeah?
Is that any truth to this? Do we know?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Speaking of biological, I was just curious.
I mean, you look at our Western media, they take all the information that Hamas is putting out as far as casualties, the nature of the casualties and civilians versus, there's never any time. Why anybody believes them is beyond my comprehension. They lie. That's the nature of the beast. They lie. And so I wouldn't trust anything. I'd like to see trust and verify. I'd like to see them verify what they're saying.
Well, and to your point, Al Jazeera, that magazine or the news outlet that's based in Qatar, has now apparently been banned in several different countries.
Yes, and they were banned in Israel, and now they found out that the hostage holders, that they just found the 3 males hostages were being held by an Al Jazeera contractor in his apartment with his family.
Yes, I have heard that.
So
to your point, I in your article, I thought that was good, is that Iran is spreading its tentacles. There are tentacles all over the Middle East.
We haven't talked about the Houthis. The Houthis are in Yemen.
Yes.
They're closing up the Red Sea with missiles attacking, and we're allowing them to get away with it. To me, it's very simple. You just shut it down. Shut down the ports. Then how are they going to get the missiles?
And that should not just be an American issue. That should be an international.
Yeah, but the Saudis are backing off because the Houthis blasted, or somebody blasted their oil refineries a few years ago with rockets. So they're trying to hang in there without getting involved. So life is complicated, but the fact that an Iran-backed organization, the Houthis, is shutting down world shipping without the world getting into an uproar is kind of surprising.
Specifically China.
Yeah.
I mean, they do a large amount of shipping.
Yeah.
So that's got to inconvenience them as well.
Yeah. I'm not saying we should use ground troops, but it wouldn't be that difficult to close the ports with shipping into Yemen. Shouldn't be that difficult at all. And anytime a rocket's fired from Yemen, they know where it's coming from. They could go back and get it. Iran is spreading its tentacles not only in the Middle East, but they're in Cuba, they're in Venezuela. They were responsible for a mass murder in Argentina many years ago. So they're spreading their tentacles. They're forming alliances and making arrangements with these autocratic, basically Marxist countries like Cuba and Venezuela that hate America. So the enemies of my enemies are getting together because they all hate America.
And I think you pointed out supplying drones to Russia in their ongoing war with Ukraine. Well, let's get to solutions.
Okay.
Solutions. For peace through strength solutions. You're very big on reciprocity. I know that.
Yes, yes. If they don't treat us good, we shouldn't treat them good. And I'm not a big fan of sanctions either, because I think there's ways to get around sanctions. But I am a big believer in gray zone activities. And Voice of America, we can do a lot of stuff to foment unrest within Iran. Iran has some internal problems.
Yes.
90 million people altogether live there. 65% of them are Persian. But you have the Aboriginals, we have other significant minority groups who are Kurds, who are very restive under the Persian rule. And some of them even have minor insurrections. Down by Pakistan, there's the Balochistan, and they have a little minor insurrections going on there. So there's a lot of unrest in Iran. And the other thing is, the people are unhappy with the theocracy. They're under religious rule. And I think it was evidenced just recently when this poor woman, because she didn't have her hijab on right or whatever it is, they arrested her and she died in jail. And so there were, I think she was up in the Kurdistan area. And they died. There was vast unrest about the subjugation of people because you're not wearing the right religion. So this whole religious life is causing disaffection with Islam. I mean,
and you bring up a good point, because recently their president was killed in that helicopter accident, and we saw some celebrations, especially from women.
Yeah, and there's some also economic issues. It's a dry country, so this water is a huge issue. They've been feeding off the aquifers, and the rivers are drying up, climate change, and blah, blah, blah. So there's some real economic issues in regards to water. And that's going to come back to bite them. Plus, being a totalitarian society, the theocracy, instead of Communist Party, it's the Islamic clergy. When you have that kind of economic inefficiency, socialism has never worked from an economic viewpoint. And so they're basically under a socialist, communist, totalitarian leadership. And so the economy is not going well. And the Iranians are a pretty well-educated bunch, women too. And so they're open to, they still have access to the world. I mean, there's 1.5 million refugees from Iran living in the United States, so they still have family ties, so they know what's going on.
And I think maybe the 70s where I came with this was at one point before the theocracy in place now, they were more of an open, modern society back in the 70s.
Yeah, I visited Tehran back in the 70s, early 70s, and it was gradually becoming westernized. But even then, that's when the Shah ran it. But his big opposition was the clergy, the conservative clergy, because he wanted to modernize and westernize Iran, and the clergy was against anything to do with Western civilization. So that's probably the main reason he fell. Look at it, he was taken over by Khomeini. So what's the first thing they do is they take over the American embassy.
Yes, that's the one I was thinking of as well, So you also say send no more money or economic benefits to Iran, and we discussed the sanctions. There is a lot of talk about sanctions and whether they would work or not work with Iran.
My perfect example why I don't think sanctions work is Cuba.
Yes.
We've had sanctions on Cuba for 60 years, and all it's done is keep the communists in power.
And then what you're seeing is now they'll just sell their oil to China or Russia and vice versa.
Yeah,
so
India or whatever.
Countries that ally with Iran should be treated as unfriendly to U.S. interest.
Yeah. I think the other thing is you have to educate America, and that's what we're trying to do here, is that basically we're at World War III or Cold War II.
Yeah.
I mean, we have enemies out to do us in, Russia, China, but Iran is one of them. And if we have to recognize we have enemies, and we should be treating them as enemies, not as somebody that we can bribe with gifts and money and aid and stuff like that. They're not going to change until, the only way you're going to change Iran, in my opinion, is you have to get rid of the mullahs, the theocracy. And I do not advocate for any kind of military action, but there's plenty of soft ways to do it, to have the corrupt regime just sort of fade away. Just like the Soviet Union. Who would have ever thought the Soviet Union would disappear the way it did? But it was rotted from within, and they just rotted away.
Well, I thank you very much again, Larry, for your insight on your paper.
Thank you, Joy. Nice to be here.
Yes, and thank you to our listeners. And you can read all of Larry's articles at www.ascf.us. Again, please consider becoming a member of the American Security Council Foundation for $100 a year. And please remember to view our podcast on YouTube and Rumble, share, comment, and subscribe. You can also go on our social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts, as well as Substack. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, listeners, and join us again next time for Peace Through Strength podcast.